Welcome to Impact Discipleship, Proverbs 14, the series of ancient words of wisdom from King Solomon himself. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around for verse 35 at the end because it's going to blow your mind.
It's so interesting that I didn't cue him into saying that, and I am no King Solomon. But I will say this: I'm much wiser than he was. Anyway, what I would say is, it's so interesting you brought that verse up, the end verse. We'll talk about it when we get there. So as we continue our series, I decided along the way that because we have 20 chapters in a row that are just lists of wise words. I'm numbering them as we go. I haven't added up all the verses, but it's one wise word per verse in those 20 chapters. And today we'll be in wise word number 117 through wise word number 151. There are 35 verses in chapter 14. And so we'll go over each one. And as we've done each time, there's kind of a key word or phrase that sets off the proverb itself, at least in my mind, when I was studying it. And then there's some commentary, hopefully making it more practical so it's not just some ancient saying. Okay, so we'll start off. Again, the entirety of today is in chapter 14, so we'll go verse by verse. And verse 1 is, every wise man builds his house, but a foolish one tears it down with his own hands. And the key word for this is self-sabotage. Men talk a lot. But if you really want to know what he believes, watch what he does. Everyone has met a man like this. He dreams of being a concert pianist, claims he would do anything to be that good. But if you inquire of him, how much do you practice, and inform him you do know you would have to practice 8 hours a day to be that good, you would soon discover that he is never willing to do the work. Oftentimes a man talks a big game, but his lack of action proves to be much more effective in sabotaging his claim than building his dreams. Self-sabotage. Well, I got a reaction for that one. That's right? It's so true, right? All right, number 2, he who walks in his uprightness fears Yahweh, but he who is perverse in his ways despises him. Disposition is the key word. You can discover a lot about a man by observing his attitude. A man with reverence for God walks circumspectly. He measures his every word, action, and priority against what is pleasing to the Lord. A man who hates God is a man who is more disposed to chase down his every lust and perverse desire than to care for 1 second what the Lord thinks. That's a disposition. Number 3, the fool's talk brings a rod to his back, but the lips of the wise protect him. I came up with the word here. I bet you can't even think. We wonder if he would think in advance. What did he come up for? I don't even know how I come up with these words sometimes. The word here for me was invitation. You have the power to invite either rebuke or praise into your own life. A foolish man makes choices that oftentimes require the heavy hand of the Lord's chastisement. A man who absorbs wisdom and carefully measures his words and invites the Lord as a shield. I love that, inviting the Lord as your shield. Where no oxen, here's number 4, where no oxen are, this one was, I remember doing this one. It's a very, very clever way of wording it. Not me, Solomon. And I think I even looked this up in a few different versions because I was like, I couldn't really catch exactly what it was saying. And let me just say this too. I'm not here declaring this is the only interpretation. These are just takeaways. I'm thinking, how can you apply these words? I think there's ways to take this in other directions that would be equally as wise, maybe even more wise. But these are just kind of the impressions I get. And sometimes it takes me a long time. I was telling the group that I decided I could really only handle about 5 of these a day as I'm writing. So this took 7 days to do because this sometimes takes me so much contemplation to go over the verse over and over again. I remember doing this one. It's a very interesting. Where no oxen are, the grain crib or trough is clean, but much increase is by the strength of an ox. I'm like, what is Solomon talking about? Like, what is this phrase, the grain crib, which is not a phrase I'm really understand in English, or trough is clean. And it struck me that what it means is, if you don't have ox, you don't need feeding bins to feed the ox, right? You don't need troughs. You don't need to maintain the ox. You don't need to take care of the ox if you don't have ox, right? Or oxen. But there's much increase when you do have oxen. And it struck me, this is what it means to have a business opportunity, a business risk. If you invest in none of the tools or resources needed to conduct a successful business, you will produce no product and reap no profits. But if you take a chance and invest in the resources necessary to equip your enterprise with all that is needed to produce excellent results, you will reap a harvest of success. Isn't it, when you go back and think of the language of, thousands of years ago, you think, the oxen were your tools. They were your business tools. They were your investment in producing something, in this case, a harvest. But you also had to take care of those ox. You had a risk in the cost of the ox and the cost to maintain and feed the ox in hopes that the ox would produce some product that would bring profit. And isn't that what we do today? When we start a business, we do the same exact thing. We have to invest in something. That investment comes with a risk, and the hope of that risk is that it'll produce more than you risked, right? Business opportunity. Number 5, a truthful witness will not lie. That makes sense. But a false witness pours out lies. And the word that came to my heart when I studied this was authenticity. The passage of time is never kind to those who lie their way into the pages of history. Huh, does that not speak of today? Mm-hmm. Huh. The memory of them becomes shaky like a house built on shifting sands. The wonderful thing about the truth is that it transcends time and culture. No matter what comes against it, even when explosives are set off at its foundation, when the smoke clears, it is always still standing. Truth. I love that. Number 6, accessibility. A scoffer seeks wisdom and doesn't find it, but knowledge comes easily to the discerning person. Accessibility. How can a man obtain divine knowledge and understanding when he has rejected the one true God? A man who mocks God is a condescending fool. His attainment of true wisdom is elusive, like a blind man who grasps at the wind in hope of catching a bird. A man who delights in the Lord has complete access to God's input and thus his discernment is bathed in divine knowledge. Knowing the heart of God on any matter is as easy as fishing in a barrel. Accessibility, right? Like you can really access the mind of God. If you love God, you're allowed to seek God's wisdom, and of course you find it. But if you hate God, if you're a scoffer, a mocker, then you have no access to the wisdom of God. Number 7, containment. Containment. Stay away from a foolish man, for you won't find knowledge on his lips. Bad company corrupts good morals. It is impossible to lean against wet... I go back, where did I get this stuff from? It's impossible to lean against wet paint without carrying off some of its color on your garment. It only takes a drop of poison to turn life-giving water into a deadly drink. What a man hears is bound to influence what he thinks. Thus run far from a man whose words are marinating in a cauldron of narcissistic dye. Even a small spill or a single drip will soil a pure white garment. I'm reading the word, but the word is not containment. Contamination is the word that was on my mind. I don't know why I said containment. Contamination, yes. The pure white garment is stained by a single drip of color. Number 8, this is Proverbs 14:8, self-awareness. The wisdom of the prudent is to think about his way, but the folly of a fool is deceit. I wrote, the worst type of deception is self-deception. It's the form of deception that clouds the mirror and the eyes. Both types of cataracts hide self-reflection. A man who cannot observe his own image easily cements his belief in his sclerotic heart. A man whose mirror and eyes are clear admits that his thoughts, opinions, and beliefs are subject to correction. He is a man who is always open to God's best advice. Self-awareness. Doesn't that make sense? If you already are fixated on what you think, you can take no advice. Not from another man, a wise man, and a wise counsel, nor God. But if your eyes are clear and you have a more sober look at yourself, you can be more self-aware, and then you can realize, I don't know everything. The next one is verse 9, and the key word here is contrition. Contrition. Fools mock at making atonement for sins, but among the upright there is goodwill. There are no sins too egregious for which the love and sacrifice of God cannot indemnify and thus pardon in a man with pure sorrow in his heart. There is no sin too egregious for which the love and sacrifice of God cannot indemnify and thus pardon in a man with pure sorrow in his heart. And yet, there are also no sins too minor to be overlooked by the love and sacrifice of the same God, and for which there is no remedy in the man who will not repent. You get it? There's no sin too large for God to forgive if you will repent, and there's no sin too small that God won't forgive if you won't repent. That's a scary look on your face there. Verse 10, asterisk this one. You know, for those who have followed KM and sermons over the years, they probably come to recognize I like to invent words at times. This is the first time in the ancient words of wisdom. I guess we are 126 verses into this, and I have invented a word. This is a good one, I think. I'll read the proverb first. It's Proverbs 14:10. The heart knows its own bitterness and joy. He will not share these with a stranger. The heart knows its own bitterness and joy. He will not stranger it.
What translation is this?
I'm using that's interesting you say that. I've gone, because I've, in the book of Romans the book commentary on Romans I just wrote, and looking for permission in publication to use the New King James, which I've always used. I found it to be too complicated with what they were offering to let me use, because I think it's in most copyrighted versions of the Bible, you have about 500 verses of fair use in any single publication. So if I use their translation in something I write, and I'm using 500 verses or less, I don't have to get written permission. I could just say used by permission. I've also found that you can make no alterations in those passages. I can't even put a bold. I can't highlight something. I can't use an italics. And so it was a little bit prohibitive. So I was researching back a number of weeks ago so I could transfer the New King James text in the book that I wrote to a version that's not copyrighted, that sits what's called in publishing in the public domain, meaning there's no restrictions on it. I knew the King James was in the public domain, but there turns out, the best I could find currently, there are only 4 versions in English that I could find that are in the public domain. King James, Dewey Ream, which is from the 1700s, the American Standard, the ASV, and this version that I'm reading from now, called the World English Bible, the WEB, which was a project from the early 2000s, I believe, in which the publishers purposely published a Bible to be in the public domain. They purposely published it to have free use.
Interesting.
And they based it on the American Standard Version. So they took the ASV, which was a non-copyrighted version of the Bible, but very King James-ish-like, because it was old, and they converted it into modern language. And so what I did is I took those and I started combining it with some things, because there's no restrictions in how you use it, including changing it. And so for the book in Romans I'm writing, I'm actually rewriting the entire book of Romans in kind of like an amplified version that you could just read the descriptions built right in. And so I started using it for this Proverbs project, which is also going to be turned into a book. Anyway, that aside, let's go back to 10. I know you're all waiting with bated breath. What is what is the word they invented? Poor girl. Her eyeballs are like, okay, come on, where is it? Okay, you ready? This is a good one because it actually flows. You tell me what words I combined to create this word. Ready? Discrepancy. Discrepancy.
Discrepancy.
And empathy.
Well, empathy is right, but not
Discrepancy.
not discrepancy.
No? Wait, say it again.
Discrepancy. You're close, but it's not.
Description?
No. Well, listen to the proverb. The heart knows its own bitterness and joy and will not share with a stranger. What character trait withholds just sharing things with anyone? Okay, we
How do
have
you spell it?
discretion.
Got it.
Discretion. So discretion and empathy.
Discrepancy.
Discrepancy. Okay, a godly man exercises both discretion and empathy. A wise man is discreet about with whom he shares the intimate thoughts and intentions of his heart, both the painful ones and the joyous ones. And who can truly know a man's heart but the Lord? He discerns the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And yet a man after God's own heart will develop a loving, Christ-like empathy for others just as the Lord's. And then I have an author's note. This word was invented for the purpose of this proverb. You know I like to do that when I write. I think I have to go back through, 60, 70,000 pages of Bible study notes and pull out all the words I've made up and publish a book, publish a dictionary with made-up words, which I think are good. There's some good ones in there. Okay, anyway, can we move on before we use too much time on one verse? Okay, verse 11. Stability. The house of the wicked will be overthrown, but the tent of the upright will flourish. I love the language here, right? Because when we think of house, we think of something structural, more structural. We think of something. But here, Solomon reverses it. He says, the house of the wicked get overthrown, but the tent of the upright will flourish. When you consider the structure of a man's dwelling, you place a house and a tent in two different categories. One is firm and established, the other is tenuous and shaky. And yet, the man who lives a life out of integrity with God exists in a place that is ready to blow off its foundations at any moment, no matter how stable its construction. He is truly vulnerable to the winds of life. However, the man who lives planted in the will of God can dwell in the flimsiest of structures, and no matter what assaults he faces, in the end, he is left standing in godly prosperity. Stability. Verse 12, self-dependence. There is a way which seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. This is a famous proverb. This is one you may have heard before. There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Self-dependence. There are two worldviews under which a man can pitch his tent. Trust in man or trust in God. A man who trusts alone in his own abilities and his own decision-making or that of other men lives in blind happiness. He has convinced himself that all is well, but the time is coming when all he has lived for will dissolve into dust. Can't depend on yourself. You need God. Verse 13, pretense. Pretense. Even in laughter, the heart may be sorrowful, and mirth may end in heaviness. The emotions of a man are deep waters, so what you see on the surface is not always indicative of what is happening below. Pain and sorrow and wrestling are at times painted over with bright colors that reflect amusement, merriment, and cheerfulness. Be sensitive and empathetic, and you will part the waters. Meaning you could see into someone. You could get a clearer picture of what's really happening to someone if you're actually paying attention. Proverbs 14:14. I like this. This is not a made-up word, but this is not a word used often. I'll read it. Let me read the description first. The unfaithful will be repaid for his own ways. Likewise, a good man will be rewarded for his ways. You see those two sides, complete sides of the spectrum? The word I wrote here is comeuppance. Comeuppance. You know that word? Comeuppance. Have you heard that? It's that you get what you deserve. That's what the word means. You get what's coming to you. Comeuppance. COMEUPPANCE. Consequence for one's actions are governed by the laws of sowing and reaping. They may not always seem to be so in the moment, but a man will always get what's coming to him, his fitting punishment or his just reward. Number 15, gullible. A simple man believes everything, but the prudent man carefully considers his ways. Gullible. There is a wide chasm between blind acceptance and wise discernment, yet both follow the same interrogation. The separation exists not within the questions, but with the assessment of the answers. A fool has predetermined what he believes and thus accepts any answer as valid, even those that are obviously flawed. A wise man enters an interrogation with an open mind and filters what he determines through God's voice. Gullible. Number 16, intentional. A wise man fears and shuns evil, but a fool is hot-headed and reckless. Intentional. A man who first considers God's opinion before he acts or even speaks will find himself sprinting away from things that are offensive to Yahweh. His lifestyle and choices appear to be carefully measured, calculated, deliberate, and thoughtful. He guards all his ways by living in a defensive posture against what is wicked. A man who has no use for God lives a life that appears erratic and unpredictable. He will most often speak before he thinks, fire before he aims, and jump before he considers on what he will land. We don't want to be those kind of people, right? Erratic and unpredictable. Speak before he thinks, fire before he aims, jump before he considers on what he will land. Number 17, which is going to bring us almost to our halfway point today. The key word is temperament. He who is quick to become angry will commit folly, and a crafty man is hated. Be quick to listen and slow to speak, slow to anger and slow to act. It is a rare instance that the impetuous choice yields anything truly good, and the man who brandishes its sword is never admirable. That is one level of bad. One level lower in reputation is the man who schemes in advance and is deliberate in his foolish choices. That's why I took that from that last phrase, the crafty man. It's bad enough when you just quickly respond and make an error. It's even worse when you planned to respond in error. Number 18, portion is the key word. The simple inherit folly. The prudent are crowned with knowledge. Portion. Some men live for the day, the pleasure of the moment. Present satisfaction is all they desire, and thus they are willing to mortgage their future for immediate gratification and momentary happiness. What they will inherit is fool's gold. Other men are aware that today's choices write tomorrow's history, and thus they show great care, concern, and forethought about the future. They see their present decisions as an investment into a greater return later, and at times that means sacrifice. Portion. Number 19, rank. I don't mean smelly. The evil bow down before the good, and the wicked at the gates of the righteous. It may not always seem so, but God's people are the leaders at every moment, the head and not the tail, above and not below. And don't mistake serving leaders with followers. They serve from the bottom up by placing themselves under those who they intend to govern. This is so they can serve others from below instead of dictate from the top. In God's economy, serving leaders are positioned at the highest station. In the end, everyone who denies God will be governed according to his divine order. Rank. Number 20. That should be inspiring to those that love serving. Verse 20. The poor person is shunned even by his own neighbor, but the rich person has many friends. I really thought about this because it sounds like, on the surface, it sounds like it's good to be rich or it's terrible to be poor, right? I don't think that's it's not really talking just finances. It's talking influence, I think. That's the word I got out of this, is influence. Don't think in terms of finances and resources. Think in terms of character and charisma. The man who cannot be trusted, who has a questionable reputation, and who is abrasive and unapproachable will usually stand alone in a crowd. I want you to catch this language. Will usually stand alone in a crowd. Even those closest to him will not be willing to take his counsel. A man who has invested in his community and made himself transparent and available is a great asset to those around him. He does not stand alone in a crowd, but he stands out in a crowd. As a man who can be trusted and admired, he will draw many people close to him who will gladly take his wise counsel to their betterment. Proverbs 14:21. He who despises his neighbor sins, but he who has pity on the poor is blessed. I wrote the key word here, charity. It is not possible for one man to help every man in need. But can you imagine if a collective of men viewed life through the same lens of giving? There are many ways you can help others. Donate time, deploy talents, volunteer service, share resources, provide financial support, and offer wise counsel. A man who is not moved by the needs of others, by definition, does not have the love of God in him. There is no better way to show the love of God than to meet the needs of a neighbor. Number 22. Keyword, motives. Don't they all go astray who plot evil? But love and faithfulness belong to those who plan good. Motives. If you could see into the heart of a man, you would discover what are the underlying driving forces that move him and inspire his decisions. It would answer the all-important question about purpose. What is that question? Why? Is a man motivated and inspired by what is virtuous or what is wicked? What pleases God or what satisfies his flesh? If the sum of a man's intentions cater to his own needs, the road he is traveling ends as he is falling into a bottomless pit of despair. If rather it is to align with the heart of God, the road never ends and is lined with infinite possibilities and fulfilled dreams empowered by the love of God. Motives. Verse 23. Action. In all hard work there's profit, but the talk of the lips leads only to poverty. Action. I wrote, talk is cheap. A man can talk, I like this. A man can talk about his plans for a lifetime, but unless he lifts a finger to take action, the only thing he will have to chew on is his own lips. Sure, words are powerful when they impart God's grace to others, and positive self-talk is, of course, also healthy and important, but no bridge was ever built, no marriage ever flourished, no vision ever came to pass, no destination was ever reached, no change ever took place in the world, and no man was ever saved by the man who sat on the sidelines talking and never stepped into the arena. Action. 1424. Keyword, crowns. The crown of the wise is their riches, but the folly of fools crowns them with folly. A wise man who reaches his last breath, should he be so fortunate to have a few moments to contemplate what he will soon leave behind, will assess only one thing: his relationships. He will rightfully wonder if he is leaving this earth with any regrets in regards to the people he leaves behind and the God he served. There are no imperishable rewards for the stuff and accomplishments a man chased for a lifetime. All those vanish into vapor. The only legacy that will adorn his head when he is gone and into eternity is if he loved well. Therefore, the wisest of men don't wait to contemplate their relationships until their dying breath. Crowns. Verse 25. A truthful witness can save souls, but a false witness is deceitful. Keyword, attraction. Truth attracts. Lies repel. That may not seem to be accurate on the surface, as oftentimes we find men running from the truth. But if we leave appearances behind and examine the soul of a man, his deepest inspirations, emotions, and beliefs, you will find that men are drawn to the truth like a moth is to a flame. However, truth is appealing to a man's heart only after the hardened plaque that acts as an impenetrable shell is dissolved by God's grace. First, to enter after a man's heart is softened is the truth about God himself. What follows is that all other truths become beautiful to his soul. Attraction. Verse 26. We're down to our last 10 verses. In the fear of Yahweh is a secure fortress. In the fear of Yahweh is a secure fortress, and he will be a refuge for his children. That song, that old hymn, came to my mind when I saw this. You may know it. It says, "Blessed assurance, Jesus." Right? Know that one? Anyway, the word assurance came to my mind here. Like, the fear of Yahweh is a secure fortress. And of course, you know this means reverence, right? A man who lives with reverence for the Lord is a man who walks in safety, and the covering he enjoys extends over his children. Blessed assurance. That is how every believer enters the day. His eyes open with confident anticipation, and when his feet touch the ground, the waters part, and the earth will not be moved from under his feet. God is his walled city, which cannot be breached, nor can its supply lines be interrupted. That's kind of what it means to be in a secure fortress, which I thought was interesting because I think the next one kind of speaks to that as well in verse 27, which I termed reservoir. The fear of Yahweh is a fountain of life, turning people from the snares of death. A fountain of life. The weakness of every walled city and every strong tower is not first its brick and mortar. Instead, it is the lifeline that brings it fresh water. Cut off the lifeline and the city will eventually dehydrate. But a man whose life is characterized by an unwavering reverence for the living God will discover that the Lord is his deep well, a living water supply that cannot be broken. Reservoir. Verse 28. In the multitude of people is the king's glory, but in the lack of people is the destruction of the prince. And I wrote for verse 28 the word communities. There can be no leader without people over whom a man can lead. Whether a kingdom, a company, or a household, until there are subjects, employees, and family members, there is no true test of a man's leadership. Any man can fabricate that he is the wisest ruler, the most successful boss, and the best husband and father in his own mind. But these are all paper soldiers in an imaginary war until the battlefield is real. Communities. I think that really connects well to the legacy and what you're thinking on your deathbed about people and relationships. So that's going to be the most important and impressive part of your life. Verse 29. He who is slow to anger, has great understanding, but he who is quick-tempered displays folly. He who is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who is quick-tempered displays great folly. Composure. Which describes you best? Ready, shoot, aim, or ready, aim, shoot? How about judge, jury, trial, or trial, judge, jury? Trial, jury, judge. A tempered man measures his actions and words and withholds his response until all the facts are gathered. And even then, his response is not rash or angered. He does not act from impulse. He is composed and depends on careful, thoughtful forethought before he reacts. That's a good test for you, for all of us. Which describes you? Ready, shoot, aim, or ready, aim, shoot? Judge, jury, trial, or trial, jury, judge? It's very easy to judge someone or come up with a conclusion before you have all the information. As a matter of fact, our nature tends to make us do that. You're much better off taking a pause and a breath, gathering information before you make determinations. All right, we're almost there. A few more verses. Handful of verses. Verse 30. The life of the body is a heart of peace, but envy rots the bones. A heart of peace versus rot. The key word I got here from verse 30 is contentment. Wants, like tomorrow, are never satisfied. Tomorrow never comes because as it arrives, it is today. Wants are never attained because when they are secured, they are readjusted to need more. If what a man has forever falls short of what he wants or believes he needs, while simultaneously observing another enjoying those things, the anxiety over his lack will rot his body from the inside out. It is godliness with contentment that is the greatest form of achievement. It's in the pursuit of being pleasing to the Lord in every area of life that true fulfillment exists. You get that? Can you see that? That if you're always chasing something you don't have, you'll never be satisfied. You'll always feel lacking, no matter how much you have. But if you're truly satisfied, if your contentment comes from godliness, which is your alignment with God in your life, then you'll always be satisfied. Verse 31. I use two words for this one. You'll understand why. I use the phrase golden rule. You know what that is, right? The golden rule. He who oppresses the poor shows contempt for his maker, but he who is kind to the needy honors him. An infinite, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God needs nothing from us, but he has told us what he wants from us: to love him. But how can you love a God who you cannot see? This is how you love God. Love your neighbor as much as you love yourself, and obey his commands. This is how you obey all of God's commands in an instant. Love your neighbor and do not harm him. The common thread is to love and prefer others, and that is because God is love. Verse 32. Again, we only have 35 verses here in this chapter. Key word, Proverbs 14:32, guarantee. The wicked is brought down in his calamity. That's a guarantee. But in death, the righteous has a refuge. That's a guarantee. A man without God is a man who has only one aim, and that is to find all its fulfillment in this life. Any one tragedy will block his path to winning and will lead to his complete ruination. But even in death, The man whose mind is fixed on the Lord is fully satisfied. He lives in peace because he already knows the final score, as if he is watching the rerun of a game that was played yesterday that he has already won. You get that feeling? You can't lose with the Lord if you already know the score at the end of the game. And you do know the score. You have a guarantee. All right, verse 33. Verse 33. Certainty. Wisdom rests in the heart of one who has understanding and is even made known in the inward parts of a fool. That's interesting because this is one of those verses which is showing us that the same thing applies, right? Wisdom is in the heart of one who has understanding, and the fool even becomes aware of that eventually, right? That difference, right? Certainty. Wisdom does not remain as some vague intellectual assent. It involves action as the godly application of knowledge and understanding. A man after God's heart on all matters is a man whose heart is fixed on pleasing the Lord. As he takes his last breath, he is fully satisfied. In the end, even a man who has denied God is made aware of what would have been the wise choices, but in his case, he dies with regret. Like, you don't escape. If you decide to live your life ignoring the wisdom of the Lord, it's not like at the end you won't know it. You'll know it. You'll know that you had an option to know but chose not to. That's regret. That's certainty. Now we're getting down, it's interesting because Danny, when we started, mentioned that last verse. It's very interesting because leading up to here, I really felt like it was starting to talk about a little bit about what's going on in our world, especially this verse 34. Listen to this. Tell me this doesn't have to do with what's about to happen in our country. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. This is Proverbs 14:34. I call this one God and country. Following after God is not just a personal matter. It will affect the entire nation. As goes its leaders, so goes its people in both cause and effect. Leaders who follow God bring blessings on a nation. Leaders who deny God invite curses. A nation that legislates sin into its culture will breed a people with shame in their DNA. But a nation that honors God with its laws births a people who are elevated in the eyes of God. I'm going to use that to teach a lesson about how Christians should vote, that they should get out and vote. As you see, as goes the leaders, so goes the nation. And our last verse of the day in this section, which interestingly enough, turning these ancient words of wisdom into a book series, this is actually the final verse of the first book in a series of 4 books on this topic, right? Each is going to contain 5 proverbs, each probably roughly 150 wise sayings, give or take. This is number 151, encompassing chapters 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So this is chapter 14, verse 35, the last one. I call this return on investment. The king's favor is towards a servant who deals wisely, but his wrath is towards one who causes shame. A man must enter his day with this in mind. As I go out into the world, I am an ambassador for my God. I represent him by how I interact with others. If he is a godly representative, he will find he walks with God's approval and experiences great profit. That should be very encouraging. If his behavior is a disgrace to God, he will find nothing but humiliation. So that is return on investment. I think if you add those last two together, they teach us a lot about culture and how we should be living, both when we consider the leadership side and the people side of this equation. Our responsibility as people to live a certain way and pay attention to how we represent who our God is and who our nation is, and the same for the king, so to speak, right? Or the righteousness exalts a nation. When the leadership is living in righteousness, a nation is prospering. And we can see that through the course of history in this nation, right? So when it was a God-fearing nation, it was a certain way, and now we stand on the precipice. One leader exalts the Lord, the other says, no place for that Jesus in my rallies, right? So we'll see what happens. Just about 9 days away from that. All right, we'll see you guys next week for Proverbs 15.